In modern times, we can trace weather modification back to James Pollard Espy, who published The Philosophy of Storms in 1841, wherein he explained how storms are driven by winds, vertical convection, and condensation. Scientists from all over began theorizing ways of controlling these factors to manipulate the weather. And by 1946, General Electric began using dry ice to seed clouds and create snow. The first scientifically controlled experiment of successful weather modification occurred in 1948, when Dr. Irving Langmore was able to produce rain by artificially seeding clouds. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. Army used cloud seeding to extend the monsoon season in specific areas. This controversial use of weather modification as a weapon of war was classified, and when it was later revealed to the public, people were understandably concerned. In 1977, the Convention on the Prohibition of Hostile Use of Environmental Modification Techniques was signed in Geneva, with the hopes of preventing any nation from using weather modification as a means of war. By the end of the 20th century, dozens of countries were using cloud seeding and other techniques to successfully modify the weather. In 2008, Beijing's Institute of Artificial Influence on the Weather announced its intention of manipulating the weather to ensure optimum conditions for the Olympics. In 2010, Abu Dhabi was able to produce dozens of storms, creating rain, hail, wind gales, and lightning. As technology in weather modification advanced, it was not openly discussed in the public forum, and after decades of successful operations, was considered a conspiracy theory in pop culture.
I've read some theories that HAARP can be used to manipulate the weather. Is this possible?
Yeah, HAARP is, high altitude
radio pension.
I always forget the acronym.
Yeah.
There are people who are sure that the government is stockpiling aliens and controlling everything about anything we would ever think about, and they clearly have never worked for the government because the level of incompetence of the government and inefficiency knows no bounds.
But
for starters,
it's true that you could manipulate the weather like they did during the Olympics in China. Like, it's not that you can't manipulate the weather. It's that whether you would really have any serious control.
Yeah, a lot of the weather, weather happens in many places, so it comes about from the heat balance, from the energy coming from the sun, what it reflects off of, what it gets absorbed by, what the upcurrents do, what the downdrafts do, what the rotation of the Earth is doing. All of this factors in. And so I have not been convinced by any of the reports to suggest that experiments in the upper atmosphere, physics experiments, are having any effect on our weather whatsoever.
Right.
And it would be tragic if we wanted to say, oh, that's why it's getting hotter in the world, okay? Because there's some experiment happening. That would be tragic because we would be missing the 900-pound gorilla in the room.
In 2008, articles were published on how scientists were learning how to steer hurricanes by injecting heat into the upper atmosphere. The High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, otherwise known as HAARP, jointly funded by the U.S. military and DARPA, is used to excite a limited area of the ionosphere using microwaves that produce high levels of heat. On October 27, 2012, Hurricane Sandy weakened to a tropical storm. Microwave imagery shows a thick red beam was then directed at Hurricane Sandy. Immediately following the red beam, Sandy is strengthened to a Category 1 hurricane and takes the mysterious left turn into New Jersey. In 2016, former director of the CIA, John Brennan, spoke of the real threat of weather modification technology.
Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do. an SAI program could limit global temperature increases, reducing some risks associated with higher temperatures and providing the world economy additional time to transition from fossil fuels. This process is also relatively inexpensive. The National Research Council estimates that a fully deployed SAI program would cost about $10 billion yearly. As promising as it may be, moving forward on SAI would also raise a number of challenges for our government and for the international community. On the technical side, greenhouse gas emission reductions would still have to accompany SAI to address other climate change effects, such as ocean acidification, because SAI alone would not remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. On the geopolitical side, the technology's potential to alter weather patterns and benefit certain regions of the world at the expense of other regions could trigger sharp opposition by some nations.
In December of 2020, it is announced that China will be expanding its weather modification program, saying it will be able to cover half the country in artificial rain and snow in just 4 years from now. In a time-lapse video, this winter's polar vortex behaved as expected for nearly 2 months. Then, on January 20th, the same day as Joe Biden's inauguration, a swirling black hole can be seen punching through the storm above China, upsetting the polar vortex, and ultimately pushing it down to Texas. The power was shut off, dozens were killed in their own beds, and the government blamed fossil fuel technologies.
The bottom line is, Texas thought it could go at it alone and built a system that ignored climate change. It was not what's called resilient. And now Texas is paying the price. I hope they learn the lesson. When we build power, when we build anything now, we have to take into account that climate change is real, or people will be caught the way the people in Texas were.
Now Bill Gates is warning that climate change, along with bioterrorism, are the next big threats. If they can convince you that weather control is a fantasy of conspiracy theorists, and if they can make it snow where and when they want, then it's checkmate for the globalists. Now we can see why they have made the global warming hoax their biggest agenda. Thank you for watching.